time. Well, you calling me a liar, storyteller. Storytellers are the most important people in the tribe because they preserve the culture. Even more important than the chiefs. Not to say I ain't a chief. Check this out. This song's called Widow's Peak. As a kiddo, he was little, bones about brittle as could be. 'Cause he was premature, born sickly, only about big enough to see. His mom had just been widowed by his father, who had meant to be home safe by season's end. No reason when they'd sent the word she'd grieve. He'd been stationed overseas amidst his men on a submarine, sent ships by fleet to meet and greet his enemy, which had hit him, and with these, what was a walking, talking target, one he didn't miss, indeed, and now his captain had come parking right outside there on the street. He took his hat off, held it thoughtful at his heart, which skipped a beat. To see her pregnant with his son was bad enough already. Reaching out toward her, he took her hand, which shook as gently with his speech. He did his best to be as tender as the falling autumn leaves. He told her he would not be back. Her husband had been blown to bits by beasts who much less man than damn machines had seen to it his end would meet. As he broke the news, she viewed him through the eyes could truly see. He was sincere in his sympathy and even empathy. Relieved at least to know her husband had been loved by more than just his widowed teen bride with his baby in her womb, a son soon to emerge that very week. The birth was brief and he came early. Due to stress, among other things, he almost died but didn't seem to be the type to lie down easily. Called him Little Dream. He took a good bit after Daddy, who'd been buried before they'd meet, but in his honor called him DreamBoat. All that's left of him to keep. For her who'd sleep there on the pillow when in on her, nurses had peeked, and just outside her bedroom window, the willow wasn't the only one to weep. Swooping through the hollow, you could hear a hooting horned owl as it screeched with its beak and beat the swallowed rat up with his bone to pick his teeth. Real soon it set in such a sorrow. She would not live past the breaching of the boundaries between seasons. She was much too deep in grief. So he got raised up by his brothers, who was angry as could be at him for killing who had suffered him, his mother, for 9 months, and now just 3 of what was 5 now had survived what was, well, quite the crazy scene that Seth would usher in the fight that he'd be in till they would cease. They wouldn't soon to be his adversaries. Picking on him each would teach him quite the hard life lesson. Many times to suit their seething anger, reaching point of no return, gone past it well, now needing no more reason for to beat him, they'd laid into him with glee. Little Dream. In fact, that's often how they woke him from his sleep. He had it rough there for a while, in fact, until he turned a teen, when the jerks would finally get their due for what they'd done to him. Indeed, each were screaming bloody murder when he last would hear them speak, paying no mind to either of them. He kept swinging till had ceased. The sound of silence now was all he had to comfort him at ease, at last in peace, at least as heaving, each into their ditches, cheesed, and Little Dream grinned ear to ear, at least a wee bit wickedly, to know he'd finally gotten rid of these who'd hindered his release. As a kiddo, he was little. Bones about brittle as could be. He'd often wind up injured. Big bro's fists would clench in each. Sent in the windy breeze would hit him hard his chin, then it would bleed. Once checked, indeed, he wasn't so chipper when these bricks thrown chipped his teeth. Intent to go the distance between the two of them who'd be as difficult as any enemy he'd ever face. Wouldn't defeat 'em easily, but if he didn't stop believing in his mama's memory, and although distant hers of Daddy, each of them his dearest sweets, then maybe he could find the strength, if only God would with him be. He'd see to it that each would bleed with just his heart worn on his sleeve, which skipped a beat or two or three, perhaps a fourth, a fifth in deep shit, and he knew it by the tune that played in silent eyes that seemed to scream as each realized their number. It had been drawn by him who'd dreamed for some time now of getting rid of them each, who'd each been to him pretty mean, and that's a drastic understatement to a bloody pope been beat more times than even he could count, and he was keenest of the three. Now all there be was just the dust kicked up, which would intrigue and be even at such great distance. That was all a soul had seen that day when finally he'd arisen, fist clenched in the wind, sent each just as so many times before there. He'd seen each his siblings sting him with the kiss of death, didn't kill him. Excuse me, at least not yet, but soon would seemed, with how his strength seemed so depleted from now malnourishment, no meat there on his bones to give him strength, no milk to nurse him from the teat. I guess good old Mother Nature got her ways of getting even. Seems some things will never change, and it would never cease to be. I guess her best she has to offer comes to weeding out the weak. He had it hard, but soon would prove to have what it would take at least to send them in a fit pitch packing. Then of each of them he'd be at last as free as on the wing, an eagle in the windy breeze, with ease to rise and flight a phoenix. Aiming high the skies he'd reach, if only he'd escape their judgment. But it wouldn't be done with ease. He stunned them each eventually, and when he did, it was bittersweet. Beat to pieces, for it was through with them who tortured him since, gee Louise, the year that he was born. The same as parents, each deceased, had wound up without any reason not to blame him for such things. They each had made it their life's mission, seems to end his little dream. Him to a bloody pulp and beaten. To tips of toe, sent him to a bloody pulp when beaten, sent them shivers from his feet. To tips of toes sent from his temples, each when hit had knees went weak. The timber there he went to eat, the dust kicked up by shuffling feet that danced in sand barefoot to float there, to float like feather light there by the creek, where had their final knockdown drag out when his comeback caught him each off guard, both keen but not so keen that up could keep with little dream. Who their worst nightmare had become seemed different, deeming each to be worthy of only what would send them into ditches dug 'em deep. Enough the graves he'd dug the night before, just as the darkness seen. To it he'd had at least enough cover he could shovel mud he'd heaved. The lead at last ahead of them who'd dead be by the time that he'd finish up the week within the nick of time too, then he'd leave. Yeah, and in a twisted heat, they each of them soon went to knees, went weak like his so many times before then at their hand, now at his feet. His fist clenched in a pinch, sent heaped up helpings, servings, plate licked clean, a second, then a third, fourth, then a fifth, no more to fiend, for his young blood to bleed as freely as his wound had oozed and seeped, and heavy rainfall brought down cats and dogs upon them all, there swinging at each other in the clutch. For him had come through something neat, what must have been a fucking angel. 'Cause he had never thought he'd be enough to outmatch them who'd beat him. Every time since birth till these, the last few scuffles, for in trouble, each would treat to last meals eaten. Yup, darkness fell upon them all there swinging at each other in the clutch. For him had come through something neat, what must have been, he thought, an angel. 'Cause he never thought he'd be enough to outmatch them who'd beat him every time since birth till these. The last few scuffles, for in trouble, each would treat to last meals eaten. What was only flying fists that chipped their teeth, intent to see to it they each would meet their end, and that they did, be damned indeed. And at the feet of he who'd beat 'em, fair and squarely, eagerly to see them bleed, now he the only one who wasn't yet deceased, would bury beasts that were his bigger, much more brothers than his wee bit little thing could barely breathe by then, when towered over each who cowardly, too far from reach to save from graves now as he'd kicked 'em into each. Two holes dug deep there by the creek they called the mud hole. Kids he'd seen there neath the willow, which still weeps, same as did he, who'd have to be at least as fast as would need to be to leave before a soul is seen. To be continued. That story, little DreamBoat. 'Cause his dad was in the fucking Navy. And they called him DreamBoat. 'Cause they was crazy about each other's mom and daddy before he died or wherever overseas. And then she died